First and Goal with your host, Big Bear and the Curtain Guy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are First and Goal, and we are now at Conference Championship Week for the Big Ten and in the respective conferences in college football. The regular season has come to a close. Rivalry week was brutal for some, happy for others, and downright destructive for the rest. The Big Ten season was a doozy for the first season with 18 teams. We are now looking forward to this weekend's game in Indianapolis between Penn State and Oregon for the Big Ten title. Playoff implications in terms of seeding, but for the most part, it looks pretty good that we're going to get 4 Big Ten teams in this year's college football playoff. Now, from our preseason episode, we talked about who our college football playoff contenders were this season. We had Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. 3 out of those 4 appear to be done deals for the college football playoff. The only one that will not be in is Michigan. They will instead be replaced by Indiana in Curt Cignetti's first season as Hoosiers head coach. We're going to dive right in here and recap rivalry week. And it seems fitting that we only talk about the big game in Columbus on Saturday. This was the one that a lot in the country had their eyes on, obviously, because it's the biggest rivalry in college football. Some may not have because they didn't think this was going to be a game, and it was eye-popping. It was, you could not take your eyes off this. It was a lot closer than many had predicted, and I'm going to turn it over here to my colleague here, Curtain Guy. He wants to recap this for his Buckeyes, and Cole, how you feeling? Tell us, give us the long and short of what happened on Saturday.
Let me fix my microphone here before I go into my 10-minute long monologue here. I've had a lot of days to kind of mull this over, and disappointed, I think, was probably the initial feeling I had just sitting in my basement, kind of dumbfounded that for the 4th year in a row, I was watching an all-time level of incompetence ensue. Got mad, for a little bit after that, dejected, and I've come off of it. And I think I'm just kind of at this moot point where, for whatever reason, I just think that this is a game that I'm not sure Ryan Day fully understands. I've been telling people all week there's about 100 ways that you could play this game, and Ohio State wins 98 of them. And he picked one of the 2 ways that put Michigan in the best opportunity to win. We talked about it in our preview of it. I said the one thing they couldn't do was let Michigan sit on the ball, and they couldn't just run directly at the defensive tackles for Michigan. And that's exactly what he did. Instead of attacking the edges, instead of utilizing the clear mismatch on the outside, a mismatch that even Michigan defensive coordinator Wink Martindale admitted that he had trouble sleeping all week because he couldn't figure out how to stop what he referred to as the 3 werewolves that Ohio State trots out at wide receiver. And instead, there was a lot of coaching malpractice of trying to run a lot of inside zone, a lot of stretch zone against outnumbered looks, against the best 2 defensive tackles in the country with a Frankenstein offensive line. And to me, that's coaching malpractice at the highest degree. We can sit here and talk about if it's Ryan's ego or simply incompetence that put him in this situation. But I think a lot of damage was done years ago when Jim Harbaugh in Michigan referred to him as being soft. And I think he hasn't been able to escape that in the years since. And I think it continuously haunts him. And I think he makes it too much of a point. Whereas if he would just focus on winning games, nobody's going to care how you do it. He could have thrown the ball 60 times that game and won 38-13. And I promise you, not a damn soul was going to complain about how it looked. But they got caught up in trying to prove that they are designed in a way that they aren't, I guess is how I'm going to say it. The best quote or encapsulating comment that I saw was he tried to out dump truck the dump truck while driving a Ferrari. And I think that is extremely poetic and accurate. Michigan was a dump truck with deflated tires. And instead of trying to just race them, you tried to get in a tractor trailer tug off with them. And you're not built for that. And I think it's almost laughable, I guess, at this point that this is where we're at, because you have a team that is absolutely loaded, sure, depleted on the offensive line, but this should not have been anywhere close to this. I understand that Michigan went Tampa 2 a lot, and that's been a look that Ryan has seen for years now. And instead of utilizing certain aspects like speed options, like reverses, like swing passes, along with going tempo, he tried to make it a point to run the ball inside the tackles, and it ultimately cost him. And it may ultimately cost him his position as head coach of Ohio State. Personally, I don't believe that they will fire him. And I know Ross Bjork came out and said that he supports him. Ross Bjork did the same thing to Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M before he ended up, kicking him out. So I would take that with a grain of salt. But I think Ryan is more or less coaching for his job come college football playoffs. I think if he doesn't at least make a run to the semifinals or potentially the national championship, I think that they will come to either an agreement or Ryan will leave on his own to go to the NFL, because he clearly does not understand what it takes to be the head coach of Ohio State with regards to the rivalry and with regards to the immense pressure that is involved with being the head man in Columbus. So I'm going to, I won't go on. I could go on for forever. But I guess I want to toss it to you. And I know you have family that are Ohio State fans and you were watching on Saturday. So I guess I'm curious as to what it looks like from the outside.
It was brutal because when we talked in the preview, I told you that I thought that Ohio State was going to run away with this. I really thought that this was the game that they come out, punch Michigan in the mouth, and prove that they should be a top 2 team in the country. That was nowhere near what we saw on the field on Saturday. You mentioned a lot offensively, running the ball straight up the middle. The other thing was running the ball to the short side of the field, or just running plays to the short side of the field. They liked bunching things up. I know that they wanted to prove that they could go to that side of the field, but they relied on it religiously. You could have thrown it to the open side of the field to Jeremiah Smith and a screenplay. I mean, any sort of mix and mash to open it up, and you would have had Michigan on their heels very early, because this defense's strength is up front. They have okay linebackers. The defensive backs are taxed, right? And I felt that Ohio State's offense could have succeeded by hitting them early in the passing game, getting them tired, and then wearing them down over the course of the game. And that just didn't happen. My bigger concern, though, again, being letting Michigan kind of grind the ball out on offense, just running the ball. Now, I'm bringing up the stats here. Khalil Mullings had 32 carries, 116 yards. That's not terrible. It's 3.6 a carry. It's 1 touchdown. Cool. That's fine. But 32 carries means you allowed them to run the ball all day long. Why not set up defensively to let Davis Warren be the one to beat you? Because in his limited experience during the game, I don't hate to say his experience, and his limited exposure in that game, 9 of 16, 62 yards, 2 interceptions. That guy should have been throwing the ball every damn down. I mean, there should have been no reason for them to even think of running it. You should have just freaking pulled the secondary in and blitzed them at that point. I mean, come on. So as an outsider, I was really surprised. It was one of those things we said that they should not have done. Michigan was going to come in, try and shrink the game because like they did with Indiana, if you can keep it close, then you're in it in the fourth quarter. And even if you're a really bad struggling team, like you can find a way to create enough chaos and give yourself a bone in that kind of dogfight. So bringing it all home, family, I have Ohio State fans. They were not thrilled. I mean, who would be thrilled, right? You knew in that last drive, the throws from Will Howard were not on the mark. Hard to say whether or not he had sustained any sort of head injury in that late game, spat where he hit the ground. But when they needed him the most was at the end, and they should have needed him earlier on so that they didn't have to push it like they did at the end. So without rambling, yeah, it was a very brutal game to watch. I was very surprised. I did not think that it was going to be under 30 points, maybe under 40. If I was wrong, sure, I'll take that. But under 30, that was quite a surprise for me. Where do they go from here? Now, if you're Ohio State, you still have everything to play for, right? Yes, you're not playing for a Big Ten title, but assuming the best happens and their circumstances, assuming Oregon wins this weekend against Penn State, that means that Ohio State would have the head-to-head against Penn State, which could potentially bolt them up into a 6-5 spot, maybe. I would say a 6 because I think Notre Dame might get the 5 in that result. Hard to say. Again, moving pieces, but you can feel more comfortable being able to know that you're hosting a game for sure instead of being at that 8 spot, which, 8 or 9 going either way. And I don't think they'll move it, but getting to a leg of that bracket where you can feel comfortable that you can get a game or two into this playoff maybe helps Ohio State to right that ship. But you can't right that mindset that Ryan Day had. I mean, you saw him at the end of the game, even during the post-game scrum, he wasn't involved. He wasn't pulling players away. He just kind of stood there, and jokes aside, like it looked like he was lost. He did not have an idea of what was going on. He was in his head so much, and that tells you a lot about what happened during the game. So he's got to get over that. And I guess the last thing I would say is, and I asked you this during the game or towards the end of the game, even who was calling the plays. It didn't seem like a Chip Kelly called game based on what we've seen most of this season. There lacked any creativity. It seemed like a one bullet point offensive scheme. It was ground and pound and out physical the trench, wear them down, win the game. Didn't happen. Where was bullet point number 2? Didn't exist. There was no backup plan. That was the only plan. So, yeah, a brutal loss for Buckeye Nation, but again, everything is still in front of them. They do still have a chance if they win the national championship. Most of it's forgiven, maybe. I mean, that's what some say, but you got to remember this rivalry you don't lose this rivalry.
It runs deep, and I think a lot of people are trying to say like this is the new age of it, right? It's like the NFL model. A lot of people referred to the Chiefs lost to the Raiders last year, but still won the Super Bowl. So do they really care about that loss? And I think a lot of people would obviously be ecstatic if the Buckeyes won the national championship, and rightfully so. But I think in a lot of ways it would feel hollow. just as it would have in 2022. You know, if you're assuming that field goal bangs through at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, and they go on to torch TCU for the national championship, people are obviously thrilled about it, but it doesn't feel so great because it's not like every other national championship that Ohio State has, right? It's almost it used to be a prerequisite. It was a prerequisite, not it didn't use, didn't feel like it. It was a prerequisite. You had to beat Michigan, you had to win the Big Ten, and then you could win the national championship. So I think a lot of it would feel flawed in a capacity that you won the biggest prize that the sport has to offer in the inaugural 12-team playoff, just as you did with the 14 playoff. But I think a lot of people would still ultimately be upset that you couldn't really have the bragging rights over the maize and blue. And to follow up with your question or your statement, I don't believe that was Chip Kelly in the slightest. I think we have seen Chip Kelly enough to know what his offense looks like. And you made some excellent points of, you're talking about stretch zone runs, especially to the boundary, to the short side of the field. That is a Ryan Day staple. That is why we could not get our running game going last year, the year before that, because that is the stuff that he likes to run. And it just does not work when you're not willing to run the quarterback, which obviously they did not feel comfortable doing once Will Howard took that hit from Makari Page. And I don't know. I was confused because Chip Kelly came in and a lot of what he did, granted the offensive line was obviously much healthier throughout the year, but he used a lot of counters. He used a lot of pulling guards, a lot of stuff that just helped to get those very talented running backs in space. And all of a sudden it looked exactly like Ryan's running game for the last couple of years, and stuff that we just know didn't work. And so you just kind of sit there and wonder what the hell made them think, or made Ryan think, that was going to work again this year. And I know from the sources that I read, the blogs that I'm on, Ryan involved himself in the offensive plan design and the play calling way more than he ever has this year. And that was supposed to be the exact opposite of what was this year was supposed to be. He brought in Chip Kelly, brought in his mentor to run this offense and let it go. And I think the thing that really sticks out for everybody is, through the first half of the season, the defense was playing very vanilla, base coverage, using your athletes, just let it go. They thought they could get away with it at Oregon. It didn't work. He fully gave the reins back to Jim Knowles, let him get exotic, let him get downhill and attack, and the defense has accelerated to where they were. I think everyone could admit that at least understands how football works, that they create more pressure, they create more havoc. They've been being able to just pin their ears back and go downhill. And if Ryan wants a serious chance to make a run at the national championship, he needs to do the same for Chip Kelly. He needs to let the entire set of keys and hand them over to Chip Kelly and say, run this to score as many points as you possibly can. And because Ryan, the other part of it is we had another late game clock and player personnel mismanagement because he was too focused on the wrong shit again. And that is, again, the opposite direction of what this was supposed to be. I get that he's 45 years old. I get that he's still learning, but you are taking one step forward and two steps back. And if that is because of your own ego, then you really need to take a long, hard look in the mirror, because there's only so much that the university and these fans are going to put up with for so much longer.
Well said. Yeah, there's been talk, obviously, on the Twitterverse, everywhere in social media. People have called for Ryan Day's head. They wanted Urban Meyer, who he said he's not coming back. There's names thrown out there. Mike Vrabel, again, a guy who's had an okay coaching career. He's a head coach in the NFL, but is he willing to come recruit in college? That maybe, there's names out there, but until we have an answer, which as of now, we don't, and we probably won't. So we need to let it go. When that time, or if that time comes, we'll then dive into that topic. But everybody, playoffs is around the corner. So in the words of Aaron Rodgers, relax. We'll be okay. So turning to the rest of rivalry weekend, the other two games we talked about last week in the preview, we had Oregon and Washington. That game, putting it lightly, Washington, again, a struggling team. I guess you say rebuilding, lost a lot of pieces last year. Jed Fish comes in. He has some things that are intriguing to me. Now, as an Oregon fan watching that game, that was a similar situation for me that Ohio State was in. You lost the last 3 in a row, come out, put your foot on the gas pedal, don't look back. And I was happy to say Oregon did that. Defensively, took care of business. They had a record high of 10 sacks last weekend. That was phenomenal in my regard, especially for the depth of that defensive front. But credit for Washington is they have a really nice young quarterback in Damon Williams. If he chooses to stay with the Huskies for 1 to 2 more years and Jed Fish can get some help out of the portal, I mean, you got to. I don't see it necessarily in their depth right now. I don't see it as of early signing day. He needs to get some offensive linemen. He needs to get at least one more wide receiver. Give this kid options because this kid's fast. I mean, I compare this. I don't want to say Jaden Daniels fast. I want to say like he has a very similar playing style to Kyler Murray. He's a kid that can run to the sideline and cut up with some serious acceleration. I think you saw early in the game that Oregon had fits with that. They eventually were able to contain him, and that's where the game kind of sputtered downward for Washington from there. So he can't be the do-it-all guy, but that is a threat that Washington could use if they get a more solid offense around him to carry the ball for the Huskies. The other game we wanted to talk about was USC and Notre Dame. This was a game that I was sitting there. I was given that hope for USC. I'm like, come on, you got to give them something. They were in it. I mean, they were in it till late. They were close. They were driving down the field, maybe going to score a game-tying touchdown. Notre Dame was up. I believe it was 35-28 at that point, and it all went downhill from there. Pick 6 from Mayava. They took it 99 yards back. So Notre Dame goes up 2 touchdowns. USC drives down again, picked off in the end zone again. Instead of Notre Dame going down to seal the game, they took it back 100 yards for another pick 6 to go up by 3 touchdowns. And at that point, it's garbage time. But very similar situation when we're talking about, playoff structures. Notre Dame is a name that's in that top 6 realm. Seeing how Notre Dame kind of finished the season, Cole, looking kind of futuristic here. They're not going to play a conference championship game this week. So what do you think about Notre Dame when we're getting into the college football playoff talks and how the bracket shapes out?
I think Notre Dame has responded really well after that loss to Northern Illinois, but I think the committee is going to ding them for not being a part of a conference. You mentioned it earlier that the best case scenario for them is the 5 seed, but I'm not entirely convinced that they wouldn't put the loser of Penn State or Oregon in that spot because they would feel like they would be more deserving because they took a chance and were in a conference and played for a conference title, and they wouldn't hold that against them. They're not going to reward Notre Dame for not playing this week. So I'm interested to see in the final rankings where they ultimately put them because I feel like Notre Dame is going to get punished in some aspect when the final rankings come out. And until they join a conference, I think that's going to be the overall consensus that is provided to them. Again, great season. They've responded really well from a really bad loss. And if it wasn't for that, you may be looking at a 12-0 team. but still, it's tough when you don't have a conference. There's no way you're getting that top 4 seed. And even then, the committee is probably going to reward other teams for actually, playing for a conference title.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Notre Dame and you can find a way to finish at the 5 seed, which in this current bracket, under these current rules, looks like the best spot to be in at that 5 seed, I wouldn't join a conference, right? So if you're the committee, you're making an example that Notre Dame cannot be affiliated with any conference. Yeah, they can set their schedule, and it can be tough. In any other maybe 10 years ago year, they have a tough as hell conference or tough as hell season schedule with like Stanford and USC and all them. Nowadays, it's not that strong. And so they set that whole schedule. Don't have to play week 15 now. And you can get a 5 seed. Sign me up. So I agree with you. I think they're not going to be rewarded in the slightest for not playing this week. I think that if the others show more grit this weekend, just like I think in the Heisman race, if the player that's actually playing this weekend has a decent game, maybe the player who's not playing this weekend, quote unquote, wink, wink, not saying names, might not win. So there's my little fire for the week for those of you listening and know exactly what I'm talking about there. Let's move forward to the playoffs. But before we get to that, let's talk about conference championship. We have the Big Ten title game Saturday at 8:00 Eastern in Indianapolis, Oregon and Penn State. This is interesting for me because, again, Oregon's first season in the Big Ten. My first exposure to Oregon football in the Big Ten was Big Ten media days in the preseason, which was in Indianapolis in Lucas Oil Stadium. There was, we're going to take a flashback here. There was the giant inflatable duck in the river. Oregon was like making their presence known to the Big Ten. And it was one of those things where a normal Big Ten fan sits there and goes, just wait till they get into this, conference schedule, and you'll kind of, figure out this is a tough conference. And it is a tough conference. We're not saying it's not, but I think we learned a lot about Oregon along the way. I think we learned that their offensive line struggles early on, they've righted. They're a Joe Moore finalist team. That doesn't mean anything because the best games are yet to play. The defense is damn good, though. Defensive front, linebackers look good. The secondary hasn't been taxed or needed to be taxed a whole ton to this point. Maybe that changes this weekend. Penn State on the other side of it, though. James Franklin, this is your moment. What did Penn State fans in the preseason, what did they always say? 10-2. They live at 10-2. Well, you're 11-1. Congratulations. You've already exceeded those expectations. This is James Franklin's stage. This is his chance to make the game and win the game that he has been waiting to win since he took over at Penn State. Now that we've kind of built up that, premise of this entire matchup, I'll turn to you, Cole, and tell me like what you think about these two teams, and how this might shape out.
I think this is still a really good matchup, and I think there's a couple of storylines that come to mind. You mentioned James Franklin, and what does he do in this situation? He won a Big Ten title in 2016, right? He was able to beat Wisconsin, and they gave him that extension, and he's kind of ridden that as far as it'll go, right? Does he finally win it again and sign himself up for another 4-6 years at Penn State? He only has one win against a top 5 opponent while he's been at Ohio State. He got a chance to do it at home earlier in the season against Ohio State, and he lost 20-13. So now he gets a crack at the consensus number 1 team in the country. And it's not just James Franklin that I think this storyline falls on. It's Penn State as a whole. They're 4-12 all time against the number 1 team in the AP top 25. That's not bad. It's not bad to be, a 25% winning percentage against the number one team. Most of the time you're playing a really good team, obviously. But the problem lies in that their last win was in 1990 against Notre Dame. For those of you who don't know or are curious about how old Big Bear and I are, we were born in 1993. So not even in our lifetimes have we seen Penn State be the consensus number one team in the country. So there is a lot working against Penn State. Moving to the actual game, I think both of these teams have really excellent defenses. I mean, you can go down the rankings. Penn State, 4th in total defense, 6th in scoring defense, 7th in passing defense, 7th in rushing defense. Oregon, 7th in total defense, 9th in scoring defense, 8th in passing defense, 22nd in rushing defense, right? I think this is going to be what I always like to call, and I've stolen the moniker from Urban Meyer, is a sledgehammer game, right? These are two very stout teams, and it's going to take a lot of effort to find points, and they're going to have to maximize their efficiency, especially when they get red zone looks. My question out of that preface now is, how does Penn State score enough to win this matchup? Right? The offense flows through Tyler Warren, and he's fantastic. One of the best tight ends in the country outside of the young man who attends Big Bear's alma mater at Bowling Green. He has almost 1,200 yards from scrimmage, 10 touchdowns. He's their biggest scoring threat. He's most of the time their biggest rushing threat, with how they utilize him. But if Oregon is able to take him away, where does Penn State go from there? Because they don't really have the receivers that I think can challenge Jabbar Muhammad and the other defensive backs of Oregon. And if they get into a hole, can Drew Aller be the guy that can throw the ball down the field and keep them, up, keep them on pace? Can he keep them from letting the game get out of hand too quickly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Can the Penn State offensive line hold up against Oregon's defensive line? You mentioned the depth. You mentioned the 10 sacks against Washington. They have 39 sacks on the year. Penn State is actually one of the better teams in the country about not giving up sacks. So can that continue? Can they get the rushing attack going against this Oregon defense? So I keep kind of saying things, and I guess my general consensus of what I'm paying attention to most is the Oregon defense against the Penn State offense, because I think that's going to tell us everything that we need to know. I think I'm pretty comfortable in saying that Dylan Gabriel and the Oregon offense are going to find ways to move the ball down the field, and they're going to score. I'm not going to say they're going to, drop a 50 burger on them, but they're going to find ways to get points on the board. I want to see how Penn State responds. I want to see if they can utilize people outside of Tyler Warren to continue moving the ball down the field, to continue to keep that game in a one score or less, or I shouldn't say less, or deficit at most, so that when the end of the game comes, they can still have a chance to win it. So that's where I'm sitting at, looking at everything. From an Oregon fan's perspective, what about Penn State, I guess, concerns you the most?
Well, it certainly has to do with Tyler Warren. I think that he gets involved in every different facet. He plays tight end, he plays fullback, he plays running back. He's thrown the ball at least once. You can catch him. Pass blocking. He is a do-it-all guy. He is the closest thing you get to a Taysom Hill in college football with less passing. But I know he doesn't run it as much as we might think. He might get like 2 to 3 carries a game. He tries to find ways to get effective, and they try to use him in situations where he can have an effect. I think that if you key in on him only, you're going to do yourself a disservice, because then you're taking away from the wideouts that maybe haven't had a huge impact on this season, but that's because he's kind of stolen the show. They do still have guys like Julian Fleming that they can throw the ball to. And we know that he's a good wide receiver. He just hasn't had an opportunity to make that impact. So if Oregon keys in only on Tyler Warren, you're going to slip up somewhere else. I think when I look at Penn State's offense, it has just faint similarities to Michigan in some regard. And mainly because I look at the game that Penn State had against Ohio State. Ohio State, one of, if not the best defense in the country for all of this season. The game against Penn State, what Ohio State did is they held Drew Aller to only 20 total passes. They said, if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us running the ball, like you talk about all the time with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. You got these great running backs, go for it, right? Run right into our strength, our defensive front, our linebackers. And it worked. Now, granted, it was a lower scoring game. And then I look at the game Oregon and Ohio State that they played earlier this year, and both teams were scoring 30 points. So comparing those two things, I think maybe what Oregon's going to try and do is make Penn State beat them in a different way than they're accustomed to. I mean, so if you want to eliminate the passing game, you're going to have to let them run. And if Oregon, if they're not going to allow the sacks, then let them run into Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, and let Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti and Jeffrey Boston. I mean, they're going to find a way to contain them within 3 to 4 yards is my expectation. So if you limit yardage plays and keep them in short yardage, maybe you have enough times to get them off the field offensively to put up more points, and you're stalling enough drives to pull away. I don't see this as a game that Oregon's going to pull away at all. And right, I mean, they're an underdog in this, so I don't think anyone feels that Oregon's going to pull away in this game. Where I think Oregon has to focus on, though, is trying to limit, I hate to say the X plays like we always do, but you have to contain them in short yardage. Maybe that's the way I put it. Defensively for Oregon, what maybe Penn State wants to look at is, the middle of the field, maybe. I mean, Oregon hasn't really been tested over the middle of the field a whole lot. A lot of teams have played to the edges on them, especially in the passing game. And I mean, it hasn't worked out for them clearly, but if you're going to sit back and pass all day, I don't think that's going to work out for you in the long term. So this is going to be a sledgehammer game, like you talked about. I think that both these teams are going to score points, and it's not going to be a shootout. It's going to be a grind out game. Maybe kind of like the Wisconsin game for Oregon a couple weeks back. It's going to be good old fashioned Big Ten football. So, and what else do you expect in a Big Ten title game? So that being said, what do you think? I guess let's do our pick 'em. So this week's pick 'em is going to be double points. The picks are worth twice as much. The prop bets, the goal line stands are also doubled. If you're watching us live on YouTube and Spotify, you can see our points totals there. Curtain Guys there with 173. I've got 163. The Model and Badger are following us in the rear, but we're coming closer to the end of the season, and points matter here, folks. So tell us what you think here for a final score and a winner here, Cole. Who do you think takes this?
I do think that Oregon ultimately does come out and win this. I think this is probably going to be a little closer than a lot of people think, and maybe a little uncomfortably close for some Oregon fans. But I just think ultimately with two great defenses, I kind of wash them out. And then I look at what can the offensives do? What can the offensives do? And I just think that Oregon has a better ability, more talent to utilize to score the ball. And I think ultimately that is what pushes them over the edge in my mind. I think that they're going to be more efficient with the ball. They're going to be more efficient inside of the red zone. And I think ultimately that is what's going to propel them to end up winning this game. And fun fact, with a win, Oregon will be the second team ever to beat Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in one season. The only other team that's ever done it is Michigan State, who's done it 5 times. So thought that was a bit of an interesting fun fact, but give me the Ducks 27-23. I have them covering that 3.5 spread.
You told me that stat, and I was like thinking in my head, I was like, wow, pinch me. I would have, I mean, I keep reminding back to our preseason episodes when the model said Oregon 12-0. So props to the model on that. I did not take that. I was the Debbie Downer, give me one loss somewhere and I'm going to hate it kind of thing. I'm brutally shocked, truthfully. I don't really have many words to say how we got here. I'm happy that we got here. But there's a lot of football left to be played. And this is the time of the season where Oregon gets criticized the most. I'm going to take them to win the Big Ten title. I think it's going to be a 3-point margin. I'm going to go with a 24-21 win for Oregon. I do like that they have Tez Johnson back on offense now. He got involved limited last week against Washington. Mixing him with Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, which Evan Stewart, many don't know, he dropped his first 2 passes of the season last week. It was a stellar season to that point. So you have 3 reliable options passing the ball. You have 2 good options running the ball in Jordan James and Noah Whittington. I think they can get it done, but you have to also consider that Penn State is going to get their points too. So it's going to be tight for sure. I will be on pins and needles the entire time. And then we move on to the playoffs, because that's not going to cause an aneurysm or sleepless nights, all the above. So wrapping out this episode, let's take a look at the current bracket for the 12-team playoff, courtesy of our good old buddies at ESPN and the College Football Playoff Committee. Let me bring it on screen. If you're following us live, watching us live, we've got the graphic up. Currently, we have Oregon in the 1 seed, Texas in the 2 seed, SMU of the ACC in the 3 seed, followed by Boise State, the group of 5 champion, in the 4 seed. 5 through 12 shapes out with Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, Indiana, Alabama, and Arizona State. Arizona State at this point being considered the winner of the Big 12, coming in at the 12 seed. So where things stand right now, and I know it's going to change after this weekend. Let's just call it that. What do you think of this, Cole? Ohio State sitting there with a home game against Tennessee. Without kind of picking our own teams, who do you think has the most intriguing matchup here on the board?
I think there's a lot of them, actually. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, honestly, to kind of watch this playoff final seeding play out. Because I can't say that I don't think there's really going to be any super easy games for anybody. Obviously, if you're somebody like Penn State or Notre Dame, you probably feel really good about a path like that. But even then, I know Alabama seems down this year, but if Jalen Milroe can be on, they can absolutely make a run. Alabama against SMU, might be the highest scoring game of the entire playoffs. If we're being honest with ourselves, it might look like that game against Georgia earlier in the season. Indiana against Georgia, that could be a very interesting one. You could get Georgia, Texas for the third time this season. You could get Ohio State, Oregon for the second time this year. So there's a lot of intriguing matchups here, but I definitely agree with you that 5-6 spot, I think is the best area you would like to be if you aren't a conference champion getting the bye. So I will be very curious to see who the committee rewards with that spots after this given weekend, because I think that could potentially line a few teams up for some really nice runs who have been more or less relaxing, getting healthy again, and getting ready to go. And then on top of that, it's almost like the NFL wild card, right? Where you get in, you get a win, you build confidence, you're feeling fresh because you've just played football. And then you go into another game where the other team has been sitting and might come out a little flat. So again, I know we keep saying it, we don't know what to expect, but it's going to be very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of great matchups across the board. And I don't think we're going to get as many quote unquote boring games like we did with the 4-team playoffs. So I think that'll be really good for college football.
3 of those first round games, and this is going to make some college football fans salivate. This starts in mid-December, folks. So we're talking about Arizona State having to go play at Penn State in mid-December. We're talking about the Tennessee Volunteers, granted very close, but having to come up to Columbus in mid-December. You're talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide, a team that you never thought was going to travel above the Mason-Dixon line, coming up to play in Notre Dame in mid-December. And then you got Indiana going down to Georgia, which we'll be lucky if it doesn't get played in Atlanta. But point being, that's must-watch football based on what we have here right now. And the other thing I noticed when you're looking at the way that these legs are lining out, the top 2 legs have 3 of the 4 Big Ten teams on it. The bottom 2 tiers of the leg have 3 of the SEC teams on it. Do you get a little hunch as what the committee is trying to get as a Final Four? Yeah. So moral of the story being college football is only going to get messier from here on out, folks. But this looks pretty. And so I guess we got a couple minutes here before we wrap out the show. Let's kind of talk hypotheticals here. Okay. So let's say Penn State beats Oregon on Saturday. Penn State jumps to number 2. Would you agree? Can't jump to 1.
I think it depends on the SEC game. I think if Texas wins, Texas is the number 1 slot. Penn State will be number 2. If Georgia beats Texas again, I think you're looking at Penn State as your number 1 team in the country. So those 2 games, I think, really are going to determine kind of that domino effect of where everyone else will end up falling. But yeah, it is kind of funny that, we always we're obviously a Big Ten podcast now, but it really does seem to come down to the Big Ten and the SEC once again. And I think that'll be a kind of a familiar theme that we have throughout the playoffs.
And then the last hypothetical I want to talk about, what does it take for Arizona State to get the 4 seed? Is there any chance in hell that they get the 4 seed?
I think you'd have to see a lot of losses, if we're being honest. I think Boise State needs to lose, which may or may not push them out of the playoffs entirely. I think that you need Oregon to win, Texas to win, and maybe SMU to lose. I don't know. There's a lot of things that are going to have to fall into place right now because Arizona State is really they're just kind of sitting in a very uncomfortable spot right now. And I think you would need almost some 2007 level chaos for them to end up in one of those buys. So again, I'm sure they'll be glued to the TV all day long on Saturday to kind of figure out what needs to fall into place. But I'm not sure that it's gonna happen in a manner that allows them to accomplish that.
Yeah. There's a lot of unhappy folks at home. The Big 12 commissioner's not happy. Lane Kiffin's not happy. I'm sorry, but don't lose 3 games. It is what it is.
Right. We talked about this. Like it's going to lessen the burden on teams, but it doesn't mean that you can just fuck around during the season, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of teams like Alabama and Georgia that have multiple losses, and it's just like, like you're kind of being buoyed by one win right now. And if it wasn't for that, it may be going the other way. And so we'll see. But yeah, I think this is, people are starting to realize that, the games still do matter. It's just the losses don't hurt as much, We kind of knew that. We said it when Ohio State and Oregon played, that the win was awesome. It's great. It'll go down as a top 3 win moving forward, but the loss doesn't kill your chances for the playoffs, because no one's going to deem you for a top 3 loss in that scenario. And it's not. Ohio State had a really bad loss against Michigan on Saturday, but when you look at the other loss being to the consensus number 1 team in the country, it doesn't hurt that bad. And when you follow it up with 2 top 5 wins against Indiana and Penn State, the season isn't over, where in most years 2 losses takes you out of it entirely. But definitely headed towards that NFL model. But I think there are a lot of people that are mad probably thought that they could get away with sliding in at, 3 losses.
A lot of our Big Ten faithful think they're putting the season to bed, and a good chunk of our Big Ten faithful think their season is just beginning and just about to get interesting. So thanks everybody for joining us again this week. Another episode of First and Goal. We're happy to have you with us. Make sure to tune in on Saturday. We'll live tweet for the game. Stick with us, and we'll see you next time.